What's it like running an agency in 2026?
It's $1 million question, Matt. I think it's harder, and I believe it's harder than it's ever been, but it's also one of the most interesting times.
Welcome to Southside Stories, the podcast about real London business, hosted by Matt Whittingham.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Southside Stories, the podcast where we talk to London business, entrepreneurs, founders from all different types of industries. Just a reminder, by the way, that if you haven't subscribed yet, please do that. Hit the subscribe button wherever you get your podcast to keep up to speed on latest episodes and forthcoming guests. But we're going to get into it. So I'm joined by Sally today. Hello, Sally.
Hello, Matt.
Great to have you with us. Thanks a lot for being with us. And
Thanks for having me.
Today, pleasure. Today we're going to talk everything around agency life, ad agencies, marketing, branding, employee engagement, all sorts of interesting topics we're going to get into. And as we go through this, you're going to learn a lot about Sally and you're going to learn a lot about her business, which is called The Team. So Sally, we're going to get straight into it. What's it like running an agency in 2026?
It's $1 million question, Matt. I think it's harder, and I believe it's harder than it's ever been. But it's also one of the most interesting times, I think, as well. The world is moving so fast around us, and I think you can always say that about any time, but it feels exponential at the moment. So how you respond to that when you're running a business, you've got to create the stability for your employees and the consistency for your clients. But at the same time, you're almost going into every day with your eyes open, your mind open, because there are new possibilities presenting themselves. So it's forcing you to really rethink how you run a business. So exciting, but also quite a nervous time.
Yeah, there's a huge amount of change, isn't there, for everybody right now? And sometimes, I reflect on my career. I started working life, and I remember, we had the only technology we had was we had a landline and we had a fax machine.
Yes.
And that was pretty much it. And then I remember, we had the first, one of those big beige boxes, running WordPerfect. And now, zoom all the way up to 2026 and we're surrounded by technology.
Yes.
What are some of the main pressures? What is the environment like running an agency? Is it technology? Are there other pressures in running an agency right now?
Yeah, I think it's, there's the client expectation. There's so many pressures on our clients at the moment, both in terms of how competitive their sectors are becoming or how challenging it is for them to do business, how they have to pivot. So they're under a lot of pressure. And then you as their partner feel that pressure as well. So it's understanding how to respond to that. But there's also the cost pressures as well, costs of running a business. Yeah. The expectation, and I know we can't go much into any conversation now without putting AI on the table, but the expectation that AI is going to either transform your business or transform your cost model. And at the moment, I don't think either is the case. It's certainly made improvements, but it presents a lot of challenges as well. It doesn't mean we can do things necessarily quicker or cheaper either at the moment, maybe in time, but right now that would lack the quality and the rigor. So we're in this really interesting transition phase at the moment where I think so many people are finding their way.
Is there a change in expectation from clients in terms of costs? They're experimenting with AI and seeing what it can do. What are those conversations like when they come back to you? Maybe there's a responsive brief with a cost involved. Is there an expectation from clients that the cost base may have shifted?
Absolutely. I think any procurement person worth their salt would be doing their job if they didn't ask that question, if they didn't put the question on the table and say, what cost benefit or would we get from you as a consultancy, as an agency using AI? At the moment, our answer would be it's integrated across many areas of our business, but we're not using it to do things faster or to cut corners. We're using it to go wider or deeper. So it's about getting the quality right before then you can say, okay, that side's more efficient, or we can deliver this to you much quicker. Some agencies may be much further ahead than us. Some of the big agency groups have proprietary tools that may enable them to get there quicker. But I think for us, it's about, we've got to be really considered how we do it. It can be very disruptive to a small business because you lose some of the stuff that makes you really appealing and relevant for clients. So again, it's a real balancing act at the moment. You have to be on a tightrope with juggling balls every single day. AI is one of those juggling balls.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you look at the agency landscape at the moment, I guess you've got the big, I think it's 2 or 3, isn't there? Big network agency groups. I guess WPP would be one that most people have heard. Omnicom is another, isn't it?
That's it.
In that panoply, that landscape, whereabouts does the team operate?
We're small compared to the big agency groups, and we're centered around brand. At the end of the day, we're a creative brand consultancy. Brand is at the heart of an organization. So we either define that brand, and then we work out how to connect it to employees and customers in a way that really that closes that brand promise and the experience. So we're very specialist in what we do, but we go wide. We go to employees and customers, inside and outside organizations. And we can work in sectors that are really interesting or really unusual, whereas you don't always get that choice with the bigger agency groups. But obviously there's benefits of clients being with those bigger agency groups. But yeah, we're sort of small but perfectly formed. I'd say small enough to care, big enough to cope is how I usually describe it.
And you've got a very impressive client roster. Give us a flavour of some of your clients.
Yeah, I mean they vary tremendously, and I think that's one of the things that gets us up in the morning. Is we could be working with anybody from IBM, so some of the big fellas out there as well, right through to National Savings and Investments. 26 million savers. But then we could also have some very small, very niche clients as well. We work with a lot of venture capitalists. They're doing startups, performance materials, really unusual brands. I was only in Parliament last week at the launch for one of our other clients as well as launching a report, the Lost Voice Task Force. So, again, there's some charities in there as well, as much as big organizations that have very complex employee engagement needs, or with NS&I, for example, you've got the savings future, the hopes and the fears of 26 million savers there. So a real mixture.
Yeah, great range of briefs and challenges there that you're working with there. B Corp, you're a
Yes.
B Corp. And I wasn't that familiar with B Corp until recently. Many listeners might not be. Just explain what a B Corp is.
Yeah, B Corp is an organisation that really, I suppose you'd call it sort of having it's a compass, it's a standard about how you operate as a business. So it's not just about doing your recycling really well, or sort of, or doing your best with carbon, which we do, but it's also about your intent, about your treatment, your ethical treatment of staff, of customers, of supply chain, really a whole load of different factors there, that are really about doing the least harm you can to people and planet. So to be as sustainable as you can as a business. And there's some very, very rigorous and involved criteria that sits behind that. It took us a long time to go through the process, quite rightly as well.
Tell us a bit more about that. So in terms of becoming a B Corp and getting that accreditation, if somebody's kind of interested in that, what's the overhead and the time investment required to get that certification?
It was way more than we expected, I think, Matt. We've always been very committed to and motivated by doing the best that we can in this area. You know, it's important for us to work on clients where we can make a positive difference. I think the team started over 40 years ago, and we worked in the public sector. I wasn't around then, but I was on my way from somewhere else. But there was always a real thread of wanting to do purposeful work, wanting to do something that returns social value. So I think it's been in the DNA from day one. It obviously, our client base will change. And with that, it brings its own challenges because no client is perfect. No sector is perfect. It's a huge tangled web out there of connections with aspects and sectors that aren't very sustainable, that are doing harm to people and planet. So it's very difficult to take a completely purist stance in this area. And I think it really forced us to say, okay, we may not be perfect, but we have really, really good intent. We want to signal that intent and we want to improve. So going through B Corp was a really good way for us to do that. And it really sort of sets an internal compass, I think, for how to operate as a business. It is rigorous. It probably took us over a year. And, you have to really go through every aspect of your business to make sure it adheres to those standards and values. It's a very values-driven piece. So for an organisation that really believes in that, is really committed to that and wanting to do better, I think it's a really good standard. There are others as well that are, EcoVadis, for example, is one that some of our clients do insist on. It's not as rigorous, but it's still a really good standard out there to show that you do business in a certain way.
And when you embarked on that investment and a year program to become B Corp, how did you decide is this worth it for us? Because I guess B Corp applies to the way in which you're running your business and some of the things you spoke about, but I guess it also has an implication on who you take on as a client. Is that right as well? That's part of your B Corp stance.
Absolutely. Every client we engage with would need a discussion anyway, in the round for what we're doing for them. There may be clients that have a footprint in a controversial sector, but our view is we're very intentional in the fact that actually we're staying in if we do work with them, we tend to work on the inside. We don't sell petrol, for example. We don't do anything really overt. But if we do work with somebody, it's usually on the safety side, keeping employees safe. But also we feel that if you're on the inside of an organization, you can influence from within. So it's very much an intentional stance, not turning our backs. Again, it's a balance. We've worked with some clients for almost 20 years. So to suddenly become a B Corp and then turn our backs, we could have done that. But at the same time, we have to keep a business stable. We have jobs and salaries to pay. So it's all about a balance. And it's all about actually how we move forward over the next 6 months, over the next 12, over the next few years. So again, you have to put a big sort of dose of reality into this, I think, to do, as long as your intent is to do better, and to do good, and to be ethical, I think that is what you've just got to keep aspiring to, but it's daily, it's constantly revisiting it.
And is there a tension there? I mean, do you think in terms of wanting to grow the business and pay the salaries and all the fixed overhead with the intentional, we want to do better in the world, do you think that B Corp has been helpful in attracting new clients? I mean, is there a tension there between wanting to grow the business but also being more selective? Or have you found actually being a B Corp, you're attracting perhaps companies that may not have considered you before?
Yeah, I think it's been a positive experience. I don't know that we've got a completely different client base or attracting people, but we were getting asked increasingly by our existing clients what we were doing in that area to meet certain standards. So we were already doing quite a lot, but we wanted to formalize it as well. Wanted to formalize our commitments. So there was some client pressure. Um, in new business as well, there is usually a very, quite a substantial question around social, quite rightly, around social value and what you're doing to support the environment and various other aspects as well, supply chain ethics and fairness. So we felt that it was a really good time to join the dots and do this. Has it changed us as an agency? No, it's just formalized what I think was there already. And it's an important signal for our clients. We were at an event a couple of weeks ago, Reset Connect, which was part of Climate Week. And that was an interesting conversation because we were a B Corp and we were talking to lots of other people who were B Corps as well. And there's a very interesting community there, and lots of different sectors. So it does open up lots of different conversations, but it doesn't change us fundamentally.
Let's switch then to actually working with clients and how you approach that, and maybe an example, throwing in an example would really help, because I know you have a way of working, you have a proposition engineering, I think you call it,
Yes.
and tell us a little bit about that. So if I'm in the market to do a piece of branding work, maybe involving employees, for example, what would be some of the typical steps that you take to get me as a new client up and running?
Yeah, I think we feel that the value proposition is the heart of the brand, and so the heart of the organization. And for many organizations, they're either starting out or they're getting to a point where they know they have to repoint or redirect themselves. And it's an interesting one. Do you reinvent or do you stay relevant? And reinvention isn't always a good thing, because you're showing up very differently for people who are still loyal to you. So, you know, repointing, remaining relevant is really important. And the value proposition is almost the sharp end of the pencil. It's almost like we're taking a pencil and we're sharpening the point when we look at the value proposition. Proposition engineering is our way of doing that. It's an exercise that we go through, really. So we take the branding, we imagine where it needs to go. So you think about the context, the purpose, the distinctiveness, and then you actually take that strategy, that brand strategy, and turn it into action. So how does that create value? How does it deliver value? How does value show up? Because value is a really important word. It resides in the mind. That brand has a value to me as a customer or employee, resides in the experiences. And also it resides on the P&L. From a board perspective, there's a brand value that a brand will generate for an organization. So we need to look at it through all of those levels. It's not just heart, it's very much head as well. And then we take that and we apply it across the full experience of where the brand is showing up for employees and for customers. So it's a neat exercise that can be a very simple initial exercise to start mapping this, but it can actually go on to be a much bigger piece of work, depending on what the organization needs.
And in that process, do you uncover, or does a client discover new things about themselves or things that they never thought about before? Or so I like, actually, we had never really thought about this, but actually, this is actually quite a big component of who we are, but we've never perhaps articulated it or thought about it. Do you have any good examples there of sort of aha moments?
Yeah, I've got one of my most favorite examples, and it's a client that is so dear to us as well. We've worked with them for many years, National Savings and Investments, and this was a little while ago now, but it was such a powerful moment, and it was the realization that savings isn't about maths. It's actually about ambition. It's about lives. It's about hope. It's about your identity. savings, of course it's important what balance you've got in there, but they're connected to so many, it's connected to so many different things. Providing for people, being that provider, being that person that can enable brilliant memories, that can keep people safe, that can help people realize their dreams. And once you start to untap that, that gives you a really interesting proposition and a really interesting space to play. And that was just such a big shift in that moment. And I think the bigger thing, we've seen it with other clients as well. We worked with the Gas Safe Register for a number of years. And for them, it was moving beyond a register of approved gas safe engineers into actually the fact that this is all aligned around safety, one of the most fundamental human needs and requirements. So it's often where a brand shifts from being very functional to very emotional, and how that then manifests and also brings your audiences really close to you. I think now it's almost like a brand doesn't show up unless we've considered that the power of the emotional connection. But I can really remember it being a moment when it was born for some very functional, very, practical brands, which is lovely. Yeah.
Yeah. Who do you typically work with? I mean, who's your kind of first point of contact in a client organization?
It will vary depending on what we're doing for them. We work with the brand teams a lot. That tends to be our sort of our main contact. But if we're doing internal communications, it can be HR. For example, or the people teams. Conversely, we're also working with transformation directors now as well. People who are taking organisations through huge change. And they sit outside of marketing. It's no longer just a marketing problem or a marketing challenge brand. It unifies a whole organisation. It cuts across different departments. And so quite often we're talking to the chief experience officer or the chief transformation officer. So we're finding that brand is a unifier, and you often feel like the United Nations. You can get a really eclectic group of people together from one organization that may not have that ability to connect in the same way. And it's lovely when you get people together, bring them to us in our Park Street offices. And they come in from with different agendas, different objectives, and they leave linked arm in arm and, happy days. So it's it's a very, again, really nice moment.
That's great. And we should say Park Street is very near where we both work, which is in Southwark, just south of the river. With brands, of course, I can imagine you do this wonderful job. You find these insights, you find the human emotion, and then, of course, that there's the communication facing channels, web and advertising and promotion, marketing and all that great stuff. Sometimes where the rubber really hits the road is when the customer interfaces with a brand. And that's a kind of moment of truth often, isn't it? It's when you call and you start to interact with the brand. How do you've partly answered it, but how do you ensure that all that great thinking, that great work is taken by an organization into all of those channels? Where do you sort of draw the line on what you do and then what the client needs to do across the organization?
Yeah, it's a great question, Matt. I think we're seeing a lot of change in this area as well. We are capable of, with our partners as well, especially taking a brand as far as it needs to go. So we can do the strategy and then gift it to the client, or we can take it as far as implementing it in a digital space, in a physical space, as campaigns inside an organization and outside, or across a whole digital estate, which we are doing for some of our clients. But increasingly, many clients want to in-house capability. I think they're being empowered by AI tools. they're looking to have more control themselves rather than relying on agency or consultancy partners. And that helps them control their costs as well. So increasingly, we're finding that we have to gift things at the sort of creative toolkit stage, I would say. A lot of toolkits are created and then it's handed over. But it does depend on the complexity of the sector, of the task. And I think there's no hard and fast rules there, but we're very accepting of needing to work in many different ways for whatever's right for that client at that time.
Now, for organisations, a piece of branding work is quite a significant investment. Time, energy, money, organisational focus. It's quite often, how do you, by the time they come to you, is that internal justification back to, the CFO or somebody who's holding some influence over the marketing budget? Is that work normally, is that argument normally already won internally by the time they come to you? Or do you have to work on, well, how are we going to measure an ROI around this?
Yes, it's a real mixture. If it's not an argument that's been landed, it's our first priority. And you're absolutely right. The measurement of brand is so important. One, for the work that you've done, you want to know that it's having some impact, but also that commercial case, it's, the CFO is wielding increasing power within organizations. Finance, the role of finance is growing in its authority and impact. So, you're really, the CFO is one of your target audiences here. They're not a separate department that just issues the purchase order. They're a key component of your stakeholder group within a client. So for us, it's about saying, right, how is this going to be measured? What impact do you need to realize? What benefit, what outcomes? And sometimes these are intangible as well as tangible. And I think that's really important to have that conversation right at the beginning. You get a strong business case then, and you're talking in a commercial way that then enables the CMO, if there is one, to go into the boardroom and just put that on the table and defend the decisions. I think CMOs have an incredibly hard role as well. There are limited resources to go around. Marketing can quite often be one of the areas that's cut, but that's counterintuitive. So we need to empower our clients to have conversations at the right levels. Measurement and accountability is one of those ways.
Rory Sutherland seems to be on a one-man crusade. I wouldn't say he doesn't rail against the CFO because that's a key internal function, but I think sometimes he feels that if everything is kind of optimized and everything ends up in a spreadsheet on a line, it sort of begins to stifle creativity, doing things differently, doing things where perhaps there hasn't been, 5 years of measurement. Do you think CFOs are they partners in trying to drive innovation, or do you think there's still more gatekeepers? Is that change from your experience over the years? Do you think that's changing at all, or is that still pretty much as it's always been?
I think it. I've met a few CFOs, particularly we work with the Institute of Chartered Accountants, England and Wales, and I've been lucky enough to talk to some fabulous CFOs in companies like Coca-Cola, Deloitte, and I've been blown away by how I would say how understanding, but how much of a grasp they have of brands and the need for the organization to invest within it. But there are, of course, exceptions. And I just think this is one of the challenges that we have to work with now. I hear Rory because maths and creativity are not happy bedfellows. Efficiencies and creativity are not happy bedfellows. We're expecting an awful lot from our creative minds. They're being squeezed everywhere, constraints, budgets, times, and but it's not going to go away. So rather than, we're finding ways around it, keep your not that a CFO is an enemy, but keep your enemies close. It's
Yeah.
understand what's driving them. How do you position your case to bring them to you rather than keeping a wall up between them? So I do think we have to really sort of lean into that area to get it to work. We walk in our clients' shoes. They have that battle, so we take that on their behalf. We stand with them.
Yeah. Great. The practicalities around measurement.
Yes.
I remember back in my career, we were trying up when I was working for Microsoft. We were positioning and driving up awareness of MSN. This is back in the late 90s, early noughties, and we had a big budget for tracking and brand awareness and prompted awareness surveys. I remember it was difficult and expensive. And then you've got, in your client list, you've got NSNI, National Savings, where, of course, trust is a big factor. And I think you told me before in a previous conversation that trust is one of the metrics that you look at. It's quite a tricky thing to measure, isn't it? What are some of the practicalities to prove the value of a brand campaign? What are some of the measurement techniques you might use there?
Yeah, it's a great. It causes much debate, and what we found is that it's really vitally important for clients to be able to measure this, as we know, not just for a piece of activity, but for the longer term growth and just to prove the investment in brand as well. That continual investment, again, part of the argument around the board table. We use a range of different measurements because we feel that gives the sort of the richest story. Trust is a really interesting one because trust can't be generated on demand. It's one of those things that can only be earned the hard way, interaction by interaction. And a brand has to show up with things like clarity, consistency, and respect for its audiences. So actually, rather than saying, right, how do you measure trust? You're measuring the things that contribute towards it. So you can be looking at some really interesting proxies there, thinking about what drives trust and measuring that rather than actually quantifying it as a measurement alone. Many of the really big brand systems for measurement that are out there are global. And they're expensive, as you've already said, Matt. And that's not viable for many of our clients. It's like taking a sledgehammer to a nut. So we have to be very creative about how we do sort of what I'd call micro and macro measurements here as well. How is that piece of activity performing in the moment, but also how does that ladder up to the bigger story that we want to tell or the bigger objective? So very much those qual and quant measurements and thinking about what is a great proxy measurement for the outcome that you're measuring as well. So thinking really laterally, but some real creative thought actually applied to measurement makes it a really interesting mixture, really interesting recipe.
Do things like quant and focus groups, I remember as a young marketeer, going to slightly strange locations. They all seem to be in the suburbs somewhere, and you'd go to this house and you'd walk in and it looked like an ordinary house from the outside, and you go in and then there'd be like this two-way, or was it one-way mirror or a two-way mirror? Anyway, you'd have like the room with people, around talking about a brand, and then you'd have all of us on the other side looking at it. It's quite a strange experience. Do those kind of things, do they still, does that happen still these days?
Absolutely. I've sat through, in the last couple of months, I've actually sat through quite a few focus groups as well. I just think they are an essential, I think the key part is not taking the answers that come out of that focus group as the silver bullet. It gives you some information, it gives you some depth, it gives you the customer voice. But, there's probably a maximum of 8-10 people in that group. You might have 6 to 8 groups. That is a sample of your target audience. It's not the universal truth. So I think it's about taking what comes out of those. That's two-way mirror, fabulous, and really interesting exercises as well. It's kind of trying to untap what's inside their heads in really interesting ways. So actually getting them to do activities as well has been very powerful for one particular group that we've been talking to. So I think they've got a massive value, and from a kind of consultancy agency point of view, getting as many people as you can to listen to these, it just brings the customer to life in a way that a brief on a piece of paper or on a screen can't.
It's surprising, isn't it, what you get from those sessions. I remember actually I did an ad, I think it was for Encarta, and it was for what was then the computer press, and it was a very simple. We were under a lot of time pressure, and I think we and the agency banged out an ad, and it was a full page ad, and I can't quite remember what the headline was, but it was a very sort of functional ad. And my marketing director was like, "Yeah, this is okay. This is not brilliant work," and the agency said, "Yeah, we agree, but under the time pressure, we think it's adequate." And then we had some other creative that was much more thought through and better. But I remember in the focus group when they were showing these couple of different ads, including this kind of mediocre one. I think it was a super user segment, and they were like, "We love this ad. We love this one because it was just factual and to the point, and it was So it's surprising the reaction that you don't always expect from direct engagement with consumers or business owners."
Agreed. So we are not big fans of testing creative.
Right.
We do not, we try our best not to test creative because we feel it's flawed in a focus group. So we use behavioral science throughout all of our work, and it's made a huge difference to its effectiveness, and that kind of deep psychological understanding of your audiences. You can just connect it in a way that you can't otherwise. You get to the heart of it. You get to the heart of the why should I care? But when we test creative in a focus group, one, it's only a small sample and it's completely out of context. So where somebody will see that intervention or that ad is completely different. Even if the mock-up of the ad is on a wall with some other posters, it's not how they will see it and receive it. It's not the mood that they will be in when they engage with it. So you don't always get a great result from that. I think for us, focus groups have a value when you're trying to get some insight out. You're trying to get the why or the why not, and just hear the voice of the customer. Some of the best sort of research that we've done is actually, we work with Southeastern Trains. We've actually got on trains and we've just looked at how people are behaving. We've chatted to people, and that's been really powerful. We've got some cracking insight from that, because they're in context. They're actually experiencing the brands that you are you're trying to connect them to. So again, they have a value, but pinch of salt how research is done and what it's used for.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let's switch to back to AI for a couple of minutes, and we can't really have a conversation without talking about AI in a bit more detail. I think like all of us, we see some amazing examples of AI stuff. Seed Dance and others making almost sort of Iron Man levels of cinematic creativity, and it looks kind of, in the right hands it can look amazing, but then you turn on LinkedIn and you have quite a dispiriting scroll through what is very clearly just AI stuff pumped out. What's your view on AI and the impact on creativity? Are you excited by it, or do you see its potential, or how do you root it back into, does it even have a role in what you're doing when it comes to the actual creative outputs of a brand mission?
Definitely. And I think you'd be left behind if you didn't think about that daily. But at the moment, it feels like we've gone through, you go forward very quickly with it, 3 steps forward, but then you often find yourself going 2 back. And I think there are certain gates that you have to have in place with it. There's the horrible phrase AI slot that comes out, the content that you see produced at volume, but it's without critical thinking. Somebody's taken it and it's been quick, but it's generic, undifferentiated. You can spot it a mile off. And back to trust. Yeah. People aren't stupid. They start to spot this, and it's trust eroding. and distinctiveness. You start to lose your brand distinctiveness as well. No cut through. LinkedIn is a classic area for it as well. I think we often see that in the B2B space, but it's everywhere. We in terms of the actual sort of creative product itself, the challenge is the authenticity of it. It's helpful, it's handy to use AI, but you get to a point where suddenly it's tipped into a lack of authenticity, and you're kind of like, okay, no, reverse back up. So that's why I think we're kind of in that space at the moment. There's a little bit of progress, and then there's a sort of pullback, and maybe heading off in a different direction. So it's very exploratory. We do use it, but it's not a replacement for critical or creative thinking. And I think that will always be the case. I hope it's the case. Otherwise, we don't have a job. But that would be my hope.
Yes, and I was yesterday. We were listening. We went to an all-day podcast recording. Action Coach does a bigger podcast, and I must look up her name again actually. But she was she was a technologist, but she with the business had written a set of AI principles for the company. It was actually really interesting. And it was things like we are always upfront with our clients where we have used AI and where we haven't. But another one was AI as a kind of complement, but when there is a human interaction point, that's where the human skill set, the super skill of the humans is. Building that authenticity as you're describing it at those points. AI is great for research and things like that, but quite interesting set of principles that she was developing. Can you foresee a need for something like that in an agency?
Very much so. I think we almost started with principles before we'd even worked out where and how we were using it. And I think the temptation is to do that because you want to protect what you have. You're afraid of it running away. So you start with the rules before you even know what you're applying the rules to. So I think we have that. It's very important to understand how far you want to go as an organization. I mean, for us, our value is creative and critical thinking. That's, we bring minds to that will there's brilliant people sitting in client marketing teams. There's brilliant people sitting in other agencies, but our worth is how we put creative and critical thinking together in our way. And that will hopefully be different, particularly when you bring behavioral science into it as well. So we're using AI to assist that, not replace it. And that's really important. That's different. We're not replacing people. We're just enabling deeper thinking. It's efficient. Where it will go, we're reaching limits with it already. I think we're realizing where it works for us and where it doesn't. The platforms will move on. We've got to move on with them. So again, it's a daily thing here. Micro learning has become the norm now. You don't just wait until you're an annual training course or a monthly training course. Daily, it's about showing up and actually going, right, what's the challenge today? What tools do I have? How do I use those? What's new? There's an AI elite class emerging as well. People who are using agentic AI as well in ways to transform their lives. That's not right for us at the moment. It might be at some point, but we've got to keep an open mind, but cautious. Protecting our IP is really is what clients buy from us is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, actually, this morning, I mean, the old days, I've just was talking to you about running a workshop this morning, and in the old days, I would have spent an inordinate amount of time doing the slides. And actually, this time, I just wrote a simple Google Doc with just the framework. And then I went to Claude Design and said, look, just in my brand color, just output the slides for me, which it did. perfectly good, serviceable slides. But the great thing about that was it's a bit like what you're talking about, that my value add is not the slides. It's actually in the room, connecting with people, talking about a challenge, getting some interactivity going. And that is a nice example of where it can really assist, as you're saying, but actually freeing up the time to be human and do the thinking and not worry about the slideware.
Absolutely. I mean, I think these are sort of almost, this is almost decoration around the outside. You're saving a bit of time, you know, you're making it more efficient. You're not spending your valuable headspace and talent on just the sort of preparation of the information. That's where it's really been helpful, as long as you get the prompting right and you train it well. But you know, we use AI to make our thinking sharper and faster, but that time saving then gets reinvested into better strategic work. It's not a discount. So it's, you know, it's about understanding exactly what your value is and then making sure that AI adds to that, it doesn't erode it. And I think that's the most important thing. There are plenty of guardrails you can put in place, but understand that first of all.
Yeah, that's a great point. Really, really well articulated there. Let's switch to. I'm going to play back because we did a little pre-chat last week or the week before, and agencies marketing themselves. You had this phrase, "the cobbler's children," which I think is like the cobbler's children running around with holes in their shoes, isn't it? It's tell us about that. Do you how good or bad generally? And I think we know the answer, but are agencies at marketing themselves? And if they are bad, why is that?
Yeah, I think every single creative business, consultancy agency is guilty of this to a certain level. We all fall into a certain speak, language, and you just get parity. And it's really interesting. You know, you have to almost approach it how you would approach a client problem. You know, why is this so difficult? Why? Asking the question why is so important. Why are we finding it hard? I'm not even sure what the answer is. I would say that having asked this question many times ourselves, I think that businesses like ours, consultancies, agencies, are client first. And you're constantly thinking about someone else and someone else's problem. So you actually have a process and a way of thinking where it's almost remote. When it's yourselves, it's deeply personal, and you start to tap into different views, different world views that, you know, senior stakeholders within your business have of the business. You sometimes realize that you've got 3 or 4 different businesses residing within one, because that's a lot to do with personal ambitions, the type of work that different individuals do. So you've got quite a smorgasbord there. And when you try and bring that together, it's very personal as well, you know, and with the clients, you're the external mediator when you're trying to do this. You're not emotionally involved in the same way, nor are the clients, because it's not usually their business. Sometimes it is, and that's very interesting, very interesting. But in a lot of cases, they're caretakers as well. But when it's deeply personal, it's very hard to park that subjectivity. And I think that's what's really important. So the information that's fed into the process is so important. What do we need to achieve? Who are we achieving it for? What's our unique proposition? And when you put those things in place, it starts to write itself there. It takes away that subjectivity. I think you've got some brilliant minds in agencies and consultancies as well. So of course there's going to be some really strong arguments. So I think you've got a bit of a perfect storm. But yeah, way too emotional, way too personal, but you've got to try and negate that.
Yeah. What do you think the answer is there? Is it bringing an external facilitator? I mean, how any solutions or thoughts on how an agency might do it better?
I mean, external is if it can be afforded and there is the right person who really understands you or can facilitate you in the right way to the right answer, great. But I think otherwise it just needs deliberate effort. I think, again, agencies are very, consultants is a very, very busy environment. Everybody's busy, all sides of the coin. And I think you have to be very intentional, very deliberate about this. It's not something you can do on the side. You have to separate the time to do it, give it good time, like you would a client brief. Maybe even take yourself out of the environment, so you're not being biased or skewed by anything or people around you. And you dedicate good time to it, and you make sure all sides are heard. But we have frameworks, techniques, capabilities that should be more than enough to be able to resolve it. I just think it's about how intentional you are and leaving your own personal ambition and subjectivity at the door. So it's a handful, but it can be done. Good exercise.
It's quite a challenge for an external. It's quite a challenge, isn't it, for an external facilitator
Yes.
to come in and with a marketing expert, with a marketing agency full of marketing and communication experts, and facilitating. Okay, this is how how should you be marketing and communicating yourselves? That would be quite a challenging facilitation.
It would be
job, I would imagine. Yeah, a lot of egos and views.
Yeah,
in
not
the
for the
room.
faint-hearted.
Let's no. Well, let's sit with this train of thought, which is kind of leading into finding new business. Now, the team, I mean, clearly you're bloody good at this because you've been around for about 40 years, I think, isn't it? And that is in age. I mean, I'm always amazed, in agency land, consolidation, takeover. It's a very dynamic landscape for agencies, but 40 years in is incredible. What's the secret? Actually, no, I won't ask that. The secret of success is probably a bit too broad, but I'm very curious. How do you find new exciting businesses perhaps that fit with your B Corp and your intent in that area? outreach and outbound is super hard. How do you go about doing that?
We rely predominantly on our networks and recommendation, and I think that a lot of some of our strongest, most longer term clients have been established that way. I mean, of course, there's a moment where you have to re-tender, re-pitch, or pitch in the first place, but we're finding that that's happening less and less. The big opportunity, often a big opportunity, will start very small, and it will be somebody who's moved, who knows us, knows what we're capable of, and just has that sort of that partnership they can rely on. Cold outreach, I think, is really broken at the moment. You're trying to commoditize. Sort of like an IP that shouldn't be commoditized. You're not doing yourselves any favors almost selling yourself that way. I think the temptation is volume, but it's really got to be quality. Really understanding a client's business and pain points, and then showing up for them in the right way at the right time is vitally important. What value can you bring to their world? It's a big risk for a client to move their business or to commit to working with a new partner. Very, very big risk. So you really have to work very hard to persuade them. Just a thought leadership piece on LinkedIn alone is not going to be enough. Constantly have to be thinking, what value do we add? What's going on in their world? Be very targeted, be very personal, get to know the sector, get to know the clients, and keep showing up. We've got to be consistent, I think, as well.
Yeah. I guess that one of many benefits of having that pedigree that the team has is that over time you've got clients that are moving organizations and then recommend you to a new organization as part of your referral new business. I guess you see that happening quite a lot.
We do, yeah. I mean, but I still it's still tough for us. It still really is tough. So I think we're constantly putting on the table, how can we remain relevant? We don't just say we're the team and we do this. We're constantly thinking, how does that evolve? We're not reinventing ourselves, but we need to remain relevant. So that means a long, cold, hard look at how we're showing up, what our competition are doing, what our clients need. And actually just looking at the results. We've got some fantastic results on some of our work. Just the evidence is really important because it helps the clients present a good case for change if they want to change their partnership. So again, you have to think, what does the client need? What's the client looking for? What's their problem? How can you help solve it? What's your unique value? And just stay really focused and really clear and keep showing up consistently in relevant places where the clients are, adding some value to their day to day. Sounds easy.
Great.
Well,
No, it sort of does, but I know what you mean behind that, and it's tough. Yeah, for sure. Let's move to the back section of our conversation, and let's just return to sort of London and working and running a business in London. And again, it used to be that there was a big agency concentration in places like Soho. And you've been in Southwark, I think, for a while, just south of the river. Two questions for you. One is, running a business in London, what's that like? Because sometimes we hear, with all the things that are going on, Brexit, change of prime ministers, etc. The broader UK landscape has been quite challenging. And then London's got its own pressures, house prices, cost of living, etc. But it's not. It's not it's quite a mixed picture, isn't it? Because actually yesterday I was talking to somebody and he was talking about the city, and he was basically saying the city, which is over the river from where we are, but he was basically saying that the city is full. Yeah. There's less than 5% free occupancy in the city, and actually the city is doing really, really well, which is not really a story you hear much about in the press right now. In fact, one of the things he's saying is they're going to be the equivalent of 6 walkie-talkies. So it's going to be 6 million square feet of office space being built in the city of London. And we were, my God, yeah, like working from home and efficiencies and everything, but there's still this huge demand for office space. Anyway, bit of a long way of asking you, what's it like running a business in London?
Yeah.
Good things, bad things.
I think
pressures.
It'll be interesting when Andy Burnham gets in. Because I think that will change the dynamics of London at a political level, which always has an effect.
Yes.
But London, I think, is convenient. A lot of our original clients were in Whitehall. So it made perfect sense for us to be here, and it's just worked. And I think the team started life in Putney and then moved quite quickly to Southwark, to Borough. So we've always been here. There wasn't even any debate when we've had the choice of moving north of the river. There's just something about the character of it here. It's kind of slight outsider energy. It's, it was less fashionable as well, but we quite like that because it's grounded. We're not, we get our sleeves rolled up and we get on with it. We really like that, it's just, we are as you find us. And we felt that area is really nice. It's a very creative area as well. Better Bankside are a brilliant business improvement district as well to be within. So I feel that for a creative business, it feels like a very nice area to be in. It feels like it's the right vibe, as the youngsters would say. It's easy to get to as well for most people, and remote working changed things forever for us. One of our consultants lives in Sheffield. So for us now, younger talent is very difficult for them to afford London prices. But we find ways of, helping people to, come on board, work in ways that work for them. And they don't have to necessarily be in London to be part of an agency that's based here. It's much more divested now, I think.
How do you consciously, with a decentralized workforce, do you bring people together? How do you build or maintain a culture and a value system for the team?
Yeah, I think every business has found that challenging, I think, to hold things together. We try and bring everybody together on a Tuesday and a Thursday in the office. Some people choose another day as well to come in because it's a nicer environment for some people than it is working at home. You're very lucky if you've got a home environment that's conducive and comfortable. Very fortunate. But So we do try and bring people together, and we're cursed and blessed with a name like the team. If you can be called that, you've got to behave like one. So for us, coming together just reminds everybody what is, when things are tough, it's like actually together is a problem shared, it's a challenge shared, and you learn so much when you are together. It's vital for people coming into the industry to have that osmosis. I do fear for people coming into the industry, with such remote contact, you're just losing some of that richness that, just forged many of us in steel.
Yeah.
And, we've got to work really hard to make sure that that's not lost, or somehow that is, the information, the passion, the capability is transmitted. So we have to work very hard at it. Make it as enjoyable as possible, as well as collaborating, when really intentional about what we're doing when we're in.
Yeah, great. Okay. And then just to finish, ambition for the year as you look ahead, Andy Burnham notwithstanding, where would you like the business to be? What is one or two challenges that you're looking to overcome?
I think it will be about stabilizing the business. So, evening out the peaks and troughs, making sure that we've got a really good mix of work, good balance of strategy and delivery for us as well. It's really about evening out what we do. We, again, our strongest clients are where we work on the inside, and then we take the brand outside as well. So our ambition is to have more of that, because that's where we really are at our best. We're able to join all of those dots in a way that others can't. So a few of those would be fantastic, extending and deepening the relationships with our existing clients as well. I don't think it's about adding 10 new clients to our books. It's just about getting even better position where we are with our existing. And that will mean a really strong end to the year, hopefully. In a very uncertain year. It's been a very, very uncertain year, but we just want to end looking forward to next year, not feeling that you're going into sort of survival mode, which many are, I think.
Yeah. What would you say is your number one challenge in trying to achieve that?
We can't read the market. I think it's about bringing on some incredibly strong succession for us. I think this is it's a big problem in agencies and consultancies is, who's going to succeed? Who is that next level that wants to come through and take this on? And I think for us, that's really front of mind, is to get some brilliant people here and in position where they can take the opportunity to grow. That is, as a small business, a smaller business, that's a big challenge for us, is giving people headroom, is giving people opportunity, but actually they've possibly got more opportunity than they would have in a bigger business where you're a smaller cog. So we've got to get that right. I think that's a really big focus for us.
Great. Super great. Sally, thank you so much for your time today. That's been absolutely fascinating, and best of luck with the rest of the year. And I know you're going to smash it. You've got a fantastic business.
Thank you for having me, Matt. It's been my pleasure.